For decades, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was the ultimate badge of honor in show business. If Johnny liked you, your career soared. If he didn't, doors quietly closed. What most viewers never realized is that behind Carson's calm smile and razor-sharp wit, he ran his show with strict rules, and if a guest crossed the line, there were no second chances. Tonight, we're revealing 10 guests who reportedly pushed Johnny Carson too far. These weren't small misunderstandings or harmless jokes. These were moments that caused lasting fallouts, public feuds, and in some cases, an unofficial lifetime ban from the most powerful desk in television history. Some of these names were once close friends. Others were comedy legends who believed they could get away with anything. They were all wrong. What makes this story even more shocking is that Carson almost never spoke publicly about these conflicts. He didn't shout. He didn't rant. He simply erased people from his world, quietly, professionally, and permanently. Viewers noticed faces that suddenly vanished, but few ever understood why. From explosive on-air moments to behind-the-scenes betrayals, these incidents changed television history. Careers stalled. Relationships collapsed. And one mistake was all it took to be shut out forever. Even today, industry insiders still talk about how powerful and how final Johnny Carson's decisions could be. So stay with us, because some of these stories will completely change how you see late-night television. These are not rumors or exaggerations, but widely reported conflicts that reshaped careers and friendships. By the end of this video, you'll understand why crossing Johnny Carson wasn't just risky, it could end everything. Let's begin. Guest number 1, Joan Rivers. For years, Joan Rivers wasn't just a guest on The Tonight Show, she was family. Johnny Carson personally mentored her, defended her, and gave her more appearances than almost any other comedian. When Carson was away, Joan even filled in as guest host, a position many believed meant she was being groomed as his eventual successor. In late-night television, that level of trust was almost unheard of, but everything changed almost overnight. In the mid-1980s, Joan Rivers accepted her own late-night show on a rival network. What shocked Carson wasn't the move itself, it was how it happened. Joan reportedly did not tell Johnny directly. Instead, he found out through industry gossip, something he considered a deep personal betrayal. To Carson, loyalty mattered more than ratings, and this crossed a line he never forgave. From that moment on, Joan Rivers was effectively erased from The Tonight Show. Her name was rarely mentioned. Invitations stopped completely. Despite her massive fame and continued success elsewhere, she would never sit across from Johnny Carson again. Friends tried to repair the damage, but Carson remained firm. Once trust was broken, there was no way back. What makes this fallout so tragic is that both went on to admit the pain never fully disappeared. Joan later said losing Johnny was one of the greatest heartbreaks of her career. Carson, on the other hand, chose silence, his most powerful response. No arguments. No public insults. Just a permanent closing of the door. This wasn't just a booking decision. It was a warning to Hollywood. With Johnny Carson, respect came first. And once it was gone, even legends were not welcome back. Guest number 2, Bill Cosby. For a long time, Bill Cosby was one of the most respected figures in American television. On The Tonight Show, he appeared as a polished entertainer, confident, controlled, and always careful with his image. From the outside, everything looked smooth. But behind the scenes, the relationship between Cosby and Johnny Carson was never as warm as many viewers assumed. Carson valued honesty and humility, especially from repeat guests. Over time, insiders noted that Cosby's attitude backstage reportedly became more guarded and distant. He was known for wanting control over how he was presented, which often clashed with Carson's relaxed, host-first approach. Johnny ran The Tonight Show his way, and he didn't appreciate guests who tried to steer the room. While there was no explosive on-air confrontation, the shift was subtle and final. Cosby's appearances became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Carson didn't announce a ban. He didn't explain anything publicly. He simply chose not to invite him back. In the world of late-night television, that silence spoke louder than any argument. What made this decision notable was Carson's consistency. No matter how famous or influential a guest became, the rules never changed. If Johnny felt uncomfortable, disrespected, or professionally undermined, the invitation list changed, quietly and permanently. Viewers at home may not have noticed the absence right away, but industry insiders did. For them, it was another reminder of Carson's authority. You could be a household name, a ratings magnet, even a television icon. But if you didn't fit Johnny Carson's standards, the desk was no longer yours. This wasn't about drama. It was about control, respect, and boundaries. And once those boundaries were crossed, Johnny Carson didn't look back. Guest number 3, Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase was one of the biggest comedy stars of his generation, known for his confidence, sharp humor, and undeniable screen presence. When he appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences expected laughs, and at first, that's exactly what they got. But behind the scenes, the chemistry between Chevy Chase and Johnny Carson was far from perfect. Carson valued quick wit, but he also valued respect. Over time, Chevy's style reportedly began to feel less playful and more confrontational. During one now-famous appearance, tension was clearly visible on air. Jokes crossed into uncomfortable territory, and the friendly rhythm Carson carefully maintained started to break. Viewers laughed, but insiders noticed Johnny wasn't amused. What mattered most to Carson was control of the room. The host set the tone, not the guest. Chevy Chase, known for pushing boundaries and challenging authority, didn't always follow that unspoken rule. After their tense exchanges, his invitations reportedly became rare, then stopped completely. There was no public argument, no dramatic announcement, just a quiet decision made behind the desk. For Johnny Carson, late-night television wasn't a competition, it was a performance, and everyone had a role to play. When a guest tried to dominate the spotlight or undermine the host, Carson took it personally. The message was clear to Hollywood. Talent alone wasn't enough. Fame didn't buy immunity. Even a top-tier comedy star could find himself on the outside if he failed to respect Carson's boundaries. Chevy Chase continued his career elsewhere, but his relationship with The Tonight Show never fully recovered. And once again, Johnny Carson proved that crossing the line, even once, could cost you everything. Guest number 4, Milton Berle. Milton Berle was a television pioneer, a man who helped shape early American comedy long before Johnny Carson ever sat behind The Tonight Show desk. With his legendary status, Berle believed experience alone earned him respect. But Johnny Carson saw things differently. On his show, everyone followed the same rules. From the beginning, their relationship was tense. Berle was known for stealing focus, interrupting conversations, and turning every moment into a performance. While audiences were used to his larger-than-life personality, Carson reportedly found it disruptive. He believed comedy worked best when timing, balance, and respect were maintained, not when one guest tried to dominate the stage. During Berle's appearances, Carson often looked visibly uncomfortable. Jokes went on too long. Conversations were hijacked. The smooth flow of the show suffered. For Johnny, that wasn't just annoying, it was unprofessional. After repeated issues, Carson reportedly decided enough was enough. Milton Berle was quietly pushed out of The Tonight Show rotation. There was no public feud, no dramatic fallout, just fewer invitations until they stopped altogether. For a man of Berle's stature, the silence was shocking. But Carson didn't care about legacy. He cared about the quality of his show. This moment sent a strong message through Hollywood. Even legends weren't untouchable. Past success didn't excuse present behavior. On Johnny Carson's stage, respect mattered more than reputation. Berle remained a comedy icon, but his relationship with late-night television changed forever. And once again, Johnny Carson proved that no one, not even a pioneer, was bigger than the desk. Guest number 5, Orson Welles. Orson Welles was a genius by reputation. A filmmaker, actor, and storyteller whose talent was rarely questioned. When he appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences expected brilliance, insight, and unforgettable conversation. But what they didn't see was how difficult those appearances could be behind the scenes. Johnny Carson ran a tight ship. Timing mattered. Structure mattered. And Welles, known for ignoring rules and following his own rhythm, often pushed against that structure. His segments reportedly ran long, drifted off topic, and challenged the smooth pacing Carson worked hard to protect. For a host who valued control and clarity, this became a serious issue. Welles wasn't rude in the traditional sense, but he was unpredictable. He could dominate conversations, dismiss cues, and ignore the subtle signals that told guests when to wrap things up. Carson believed a late-night show was a collaboration, not a personal stage, and Wells didn't always see it that way. Over time, the invitations slowed. Then they stopped. There was no argument, no dramatic confrontation. Johnny Carson simply chose consistency over chaos. For him, even immense talent wasn't enough if it disrupted the balance of the show. What made this decision so telling was Carson's discipline. Many hosts would tolerate difficult behavior for ratings or prestige. Johnny didn't. He believed the audience came first, and anything that threatened the flow of the program wasn't worth repeating. Orson Welles remained a towering figure in entertainment history, but his relationship with The Tonight Show quietly faded away. It was another reminder that on Johnny Carson's stage, discipline mattered just as much as brilliance. Guest number 5, Orson Welles. Guest number 6, Don Rickles. Don Rickles built his entire career on insults. Audiences loved him for it, and on most shows, his sharp tongue was treated as harmless fun. But The Tonight Show wasn't just another stage. It was Johnny Carson's world, and even Don Rickles had limits he wasn't supposed to cross. At first, Rickles' appearances were electric. His jokes were bold, unpredictable, and often aimed directly at Carson himself. While Johnny could laugh along, insiders say there were moments when the humor went a little too far. Certain comments reportedly crossed from playful roasting into uncomfortable territory, breaking the balance Carson carefully maintained. Carson believed comedy should never embarrass the host or derail the atmosphere of the show. Rickles, driven by instinct and audience reaction, didn't always recognize that line in the moment. When jokes began to feel personal rather than performative, the relationship became strained. Unlike other fallouts, this one wasn't immediate. Invitations became less frequent. Long gaps appeared between appearances. While Rickles remained hugely popular elsewhere, his presence on The Tonight Show slowly faded. Carson didn't need to explain his decision. His silence made the message clear. This situation highlighted Johnny Carson's boundaries. He wasn't against edgy humor. He wasn't afraid of being teased. But respect still came first. When the joke stopped serving the show and started serving the ego, Carson pulled back. Don Rickles continued to thrive as an insult comic, but his relationship with Johnny Carson never returned to its original warmth. It was another example of how quickly things could change when the balance of respect was lost. Guest number 7, Johnny Yun. Johnny Yun's appearances on The Tonight Show initially brought a different kind of energy. His comedy stood out, and audiences noticed. But over time, controversy began to overshadow his performances, and that was something Johnny Carson took very seriously. Yun's material increasingly pushed into sensitive territory. Certain jokes were widely criticized for being offensive, even by the standards of the time. While some comedians relied on shock value, Carson believed late-night television had limits. His show reached millions of households, and he was deeply aware of the responsibility that came with that reach. As complaints and criticism grew, Carson reportedly became uncomfortable associating The Tonight Show with material that risked alienating viewers. Rather than address it publicly or turn the situation into a spectacle, Carson chose a quieter solution. Johnny Yun simply stopped appearing. There was no on-air confrontation, no explanation to the audience, just a clear professional decision. Carson didn't believe every issue needed to be debated publicly. Sometimes the cleanest response was removal. This moment reinforced a pattern viewers rarely saw. Johnny Carson wasn't impulsive. He didn't react emotionally. When a guest no longer aligned with the tone and standards of his show, the door closed without drama. Johnny Yun continued performing elsewhere, but his time on The Tonight Show was effectively over. For Carson, protecting the integrity of the program always came first, even when it meant cutting ties completely. Guest number 8, Shecky Greene. Shecky Greene was a fast-talking, sharp-edged comedian who thrived on confrontation. On stage, his aggressive style drew attention. Off-stage, that same attitude reportedly caused serious friction, especially with Johnny Carson. Unlike many guests who carefully adapted to Carson's calm, controlled format, Greene often went in the opposite direction. He was known for openly criticizing Carson, questioning his talent, and making dismissive comments about The Tonight Show itself. For Johnny, this wasn't comedy, it was disrespect. Carson believed any disagreements should stay private. Publicly attacking the host while benefiting from his platform crossed a clear line. According to industry insiders, Greene's comments didn't go unnoticed. and Johnny made a firm decision behind the scenes. After that point, Shecky Greene was never invited back. No warnings. No negotiations. Carson didn't engage in a public feud or trade insults. He simply removed Greene from the guest list entirely. This situation perfectly illustrated Carson's leadership style. He didn't chase drama. He didn't try to win arguments. He controlled access. And once that access was gone, there was no path back. Greene continued performing and remained outspoken, but The Tonight Show was no longer part of his career. For those paying attention in Hollywood, the lesson was obvious. Criticize Johnny Carson publicly, and the door would close for good. Guest number 9, Jackie Mason. Jackie Mason was one of the most outspoken comedians of his era, famous for his sharp wit and fearless observations. On The Tonight Show, his appearances were highly anticipated because he never held back. But that boldness eventually caused problems with Johnny Carson. Mason reportedly crossed the line during several interviews, making comments that Carson felt were disrespectful or personal rather than comedic. While audiences laughed, behind the scenes, the atmosphere was tense. Carson valued humor, yes, but he also demanded professionalism and respect for the stage he controlled. Over time, Mason's invitations became fewer and further apart. Carson didn't make a public statement or confront him on air. He simply removed Mason from the rotation. It was a subtle but unmistakable message. Talent and popularity couldn't outweigh disrespect for the host. This fallout reflected a key truth about Johnny Carson's world. Every guest, no matter how famous or charismatic, was expected to follow the unspoken rules. Overstep, and the consequences were final. Mason continued performing across the country, but The Tonight Show was no longer an option. The story of Jackie Mason serves as a reminder that Carson's authority was absolute. In late-night television, respect wasn't negotiable, and once it was lost, there was no coming back. Guest number 10, Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was a comedy legend long before he ever sat across from Johnny Carson. Known for his physical humor, manic energy, and larger-than-life personality, he seemed like a perfect fit for The Tonight Show. But behind the scenes, clashes began to surface. Lewis reportedly struggled with the structure and timing that Carson demanded. His performances, while hilarious, sometimes dominated the show, making it difficult for the host to maintain control. Carson, who valued rhythm, precision, and respect for the stage, saw this as a problem. What worked on other platforms didn't always work on The Tonight Show. Over time, tensions grew. Lewis would push boundaries, testing how far he could go with jokes and antics. While audiences laughed, Carson quietly assessed whether the guest's behavior aligned with the standards of his program. Ultimately, Carson chose consistency over celebrity. Jerry Lewis was no longer invited back. There was no public feud, no dramatic confrontation. Carson's silence spoke louder than words. For Hollywood insiders, it was another example of how seriously he took his role as gatekeeper. Fame and talent didn't automatically earn you unlimited access. Respect and professionalism came first. Jerry Lewis continued his iconic career, but his relationship with Johnny Carson ended quietly yet permanently. It was a final reminder that on Johnny Carson's stage, even legends had to follow the rules, and crossing the line could close the door for life.